Mr. President, these are challenging, indeed daunting times, and while we're coming out of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, with continued high unemployment, our economy still remains extraordinarily fragile. And the fragility is not simply a macroeconomic phenomenon. It affects every family in this country who are worried about their employment, worrying about the future of their children, worrying about whether their parents will still enjoy adequate coverage under Medicare, will still be able to draw some sustenance from Social Security checks. All these worries are the daily lot of all Americans, and we have to respond to it. The most salient factor that affects most Americans is the dramatic loss of employment beginning in 2007, 2008, as the financial crisis engulfed this country. The United States economy has lost about 8.7 million private sector jobs just in 2008 and 2009 alone. These were times when a Republican president was continuing to accumulate huge deficit spending, most of it initiating and beginning with tax cuts, which my Republican colleagues supported enthusiastically, 2 wars that were not paid for, which were supported overwhelmingly by my Republican colleagues, entitlement expansion of Part D of Medicare, which, again, supported. And at no time did I hear the kind of outcry about growing deficits that we're hearing today. We all understand that after the 10 years of this decade, 8 of which were under the presidency of George W. Bush, we're in a very difficult deficit position. That position is made worse because our economy is not generating jobs. And one of the aspects of all these so-called plans, the cut, balance, whatever plan, and all the rest, is this fundamental question. How is it going to help us grow our economy and grow jobs in Rhode Island, in Vermont, in Wyoming? That seems to elude all of the proponents of these plans at the moment. We have seen, since President Obama has taken office, some growth in employment, 16 consecutive months of private sector job growth, about 2.1 million jobs, in sharp contrast to what was happening under President Bush in the last 2 years of his administration. But we've got a long, long way to go. And indeed, we have a long, long way to go to make up for the surplus which President Bush and the Republican Congress inherited in 2001 and the deficit and economic destruction that President Obama inherited when he took office as President of the United States. Our most immediate and pressing business is try to reach some principled compromise on raising the debt ceiling. But instead of doing that, something that was done, I must say, rather routinely under President Bush, about 8 times, even though Democrats, we had very serious disagreements with him. Disagreements on his tax policy, disagreements on a tax policy that was increasing the deficit, disagreement on wars, which were increasing the deficit, as well as distorting our strategy internationally. But at no time did we try to use the debt ceiling as the ultimate apocalyptic weapon to bring the president, and perhaps in doing so, even the country down. But I hear too many of my colleagues talking in those terms on the other side, particularly in the other chamber. Now, the bill that has been passed in the House is an attempt to shrink government, protect the wealthy and special interests in the tax code. It ties a debt ceiling increase to passage of a constitutional amendment that would require 38 states for ratification. Once again, we are taking what was routinely done and necessary so that we don't default on our credit and making it the vehicle for altering the Constitution of the United States, of building in even additional protections in the tax code for our wealthiest citizens. Now, this approach they're taking will, I think, needlessly jeopardize Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, while it enshrines in the Constitution further protections for loopholes in our tax code and the tax benefits that many of the wealthy and large corporations enjoy today. At the heart of what they're trying to propose in the House, and they've sent to us, is it to make it easier to cut these vital programs, a range of programs that involve transportation security agents at our airports, that can involve the flight controllers in the towers, can involve the distribution of, indeed, agriculture programs, which affect large parts of this country, not so much my state, but large parts of this country. All of that would be subject to the kind of calculation of cutting, while it would be extraordinarily difficult to raise revenues. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that's what the American people want. What I've seen from the polling is a huge number of Americans who are frankly saying, you know, the wealthiest in this country are enjoying huge tax benefits. 80%, I believe, of the American public are saying, you know, the first step we should do in balance the budget is to raise the taxes up on the wealthiest Americans. That's what they're saying. They're not saying cut benefits from people who are on the margin, who are struggling, working poor, who may be just under the line or over the line to qualify for Medicaid benefits in a state, health care for their children. I think the American people are smarter and more decent than some of the proposals that are being surfaced around here. Now, again, the caps on spending, they're all dressed up as sort of have no real effect on the important programs, but they'll affect on every program, including Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. And for people who are still struggling to find work, who are still struggling to find some type of traction in a difficult economy, these cuts can be devastating. And indeed, one of the challenges we have to generate our economy again is growth. And when we pull back from spending in the economy, that'll further accelerate, I think, the lack of demand and the lack of any incentive for private hiring. We're already seeing companies cut back. And why are they saying this? No demand. People aren't buying. People are saving. And if they not sense, but they know they have to save more because they're not quite sure whether they'll get all their Social Security check or their Medicare benefits or any other benefits, well, that's just going to drive demand further down and slow the economy further down. Now, the Republican plan includes overall spending caps that reach 19.9% of GDP starting in 2017. But we have to look at this number in historical perspective. Over the past 40 years, this rate of spending is not only lower than the average spending, but moreover, outlays as a percentage of gross domestic product have only declined to 19.9% or lower when unemployment has been 6% or below. That makes sense. When the American economy is working, people don't collect a lot of benefits. They have a job. They don't need the kind of assistance they need today. And this cap of 19.9% is totally out of a context when it comes to the present unemployment rate of 9%, and frankly, perhaps an even larger unemployment rate if this program is enacted. Again, I don't think this makes sense in terms of the simple mathematics or the history or the underlying policies that it would inevitably produce in the country. And yet we're still, in this Republican proposal, protecting the most special interests in this country. Big oil and corporations. Those tax breaks, those tax perks, they're still there, and they'll continue to be there. Now, we all recognize we've got to make tough decisions about spending and about revenues. What I find acutely ironic is Democrats did that in 1993 and 1994. And that we heard about it for years and years later by Republicans assailing us. Of course, by 2000, we had a surplus. We had an economy that had an unemployment rate much closer to 5% than 10%. And all of that hard work, without any assistance by the Republicans, was completely squandered beginning in January 2001. And now we're back to the same challenge that we faced in 93 and 94. And we did it by making tough decisions. We did it over several years. We did it by trying to balance both cutting expenditures and increasing appropriate revenue, and also by recognizing that working Americans need the assistance, the support of their government. And we can do it again, and I hope we do. But the first challenge, the one that has to be met, is to raise the debt ceiling. Defaulting on our debt would have catastrophic consequences. As we approach this deadline, the mere fact that we haven't done anything yet is prompting credit agencies to suggest that they will downgrade our rating. And one of the most salient figures, which I've heard in this debate, is that for every increase of 1% in our cost of credit, in the interest we must pay to borrow, over 10 years we'll add $1.3 trillion to our deficits. The longer we avoid raising the debt ceiling, the closer we come to actually accelerating the deficit dramatically by increasing the rate that we have to pay to borrow funds. And the other point I make, and the final point, this is not for new spending we have to borrow money. This is for the accumulation of the deficit that began dramatically in January 2001. And so I would urge my colleagues to move promptly and responsibly to raise the debt ceiling, and then to get on the hard, difficult work, not of some magic plan that is produced overnight, but the long, difficult, hard work of balancing our budget as we did as Democrats in the 1990s, and then later in 1996, 97, with a Republican Congress, further added to the deficit reduction under the leadership of President Clinton.